Welcome back to the All-In Affordable Housing Show here at LTV. Today, I am very excited to be joined by the County Legislator for District 1 in Suffolk County, Al Krupski. How you doing today on this Monday afternoon?
Very good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining me. You know, I've had your counterpart, as some like to say, in Legislator Fleming. So now I'm giving you your turn to hop on my show here and talk a little about housing. As we know, in not only Long Island, but the entire country, there's a housing crisis. It's not one state issue or anything else. And everyone's trying to figure out what we can do about it. But ironically, I would like to start off today by talking to you a little bit about Plum Island quickly. I noticed you had a lot of efforts in preserving Plum Island so it doesn't become development. And out here, we have a lot of connections with Plum Island as it's really close to us. So just quickly, I would love for you to talk about that preservation project, as I thought it was really awesome. And, you know, we're talking about housing and development, but I agree with you. That is one place that shouldn't be developed.
Yeah, that was a concern. I was on the town board in 2008, and the general services came out to the town and said, oh, by the way, we're going to sell Plum Island to the highest bidder. We're going to use the money, and we're going to build a new agricultural and animal disease research facility in Kansas. And so Plum Island, and Ruth Ann Bramson and Amy Folk and Jeffrey Fleming wrote a book on Plum Island. It was really a good history of, at least the last basically 400 years of that we know of Plum Island, and it's played an important role in the North Fork. And as I've only been there once, and you can see how the Army has had a big footprint there, and the Animal Disease Research world-class facility has been there, isolated on an island. So there was a shock to the town that it could be sold and closed. And it was an employer in town, certainly. Some of my neighbors worked there. And after meeting with them for really a couple of years, the town asked the town planner if she could come up with some zoning that would help protect the island upon sale, because we didn't want to give the wrong impression that this was an island that the government had owned for 100 years, and so there was no underlying zoning. So now it's sort of unprotected. And so how do we protect it from something that would be, really damaging to the island itself and to the North Fork? So it's two zones. One is about 125 acres for the research facility, and for, I think it includes renewable energy. And the other is a 600 plus acre preserve area. There's a lot of historic structures. I mean, obviously the next one is there's the lighthouse there on Plum Gut, and then there's a lot of infrastructure that the Army left associated with Fort Terry, and so that is in various stages of disrepair. So there's a lot of questions of who could run it, and then the town board, after I left, passed a special zone on the Orient parcel to protect that, to say that couldn't be sold separately, because obviously that's the important ferry access slip to the island.
Yeah, Plum Island is, there's a lot of mystery and intrigue there, but it's necessary. And what was done there was there was a lot of different animal studies, like you said, and different things. But I agree, it's very important to preserve that. And even to this day, it's still a very, locked down, controlled area. Fishing boats sometimes have to go park there because of boat issues or something. That actually happened to my dad once. You can't even get off the boat. But it would have been distressing to see development, and specifically overdevelopment there. And that kind of leads us into our housing, because, you got to find housing somewhere to put it. But today, specifically with you, I know you had a lot of work. I try to narrow the topics on what each person is more knowledgeable about or what they've been doing. And I recognized in your history, you had a lot of work on septic systems, which is a massive topic when we talk about building affordable housing, specifically accessory dwelling units, which we'll get into. but this is often overlooked by the public in the immediate sense. But it really costs a lot of money to put in septic systems or sewer systems. So specifically, I'd like to ask you first, why choose a septic system over a sewer system?
So the wastewater treatment, as you accurately describe it, is very expensive. And when you have a densely populated island like we do, the waste has to go somewhere. And right now, we drink out of our aquifer. We also are putting most of our waste into the aquifer. The alternative is to pump it offshore and then put all our waste into the ocean or into the sound. So this is definitely a waste problem that we're facing. So the county is trying to make efforts, and I give County Executive Steve Ballone a lot of credit for trying to come up with these advanced alternative systems for single-family dwellings that will treat at least the nitrogen in the waste to a much greater degree, so it doesn't just mainline into our aquifer. But think about all the other things that go down the sink, or go down the drain, all the other household products, the pharmaceuticals that pass through people. Um, think about all the household cleansers and whatnot. They will all end up in our drinking water. So this is a serious matter that that the county's charged with it because of the health department trying to address a better wastewater treatment. So what sewers do typically is allow for greater density because and you can start in Manhattan and work your way out, right, to Orange Point. So if what does your land use want to look like? What does your community want to look like? Sewers are very expensive to run. They're not only expensive to build, they're very expensive to operate. I sat on Suffolk County Sewer Agency for 9 years. I sat on the Suffolk County Infrastructure Committee for a number of years. And so I know that the cost, and I'm still on the committee, Public Works Committee. So the cost of running all these sewer plants in the county there's a lot of personnel time, but there's also a lot of constant repair. It's pumps, it's moving parts, pumps and pipes. So and it's got to be done correctly. You have to have experts do it. The county, I think, does a very good job of running these sewer plants, but it's not inexpensive. So if you have if you put that infrastructure in place, you need a lot of customers to pay for it. That's a simple matter. And so your density increases. If you rely on single family wastewater treatment septic systems, you obviously you don't have to have the density to pay for those. And years ago, an old cesspool was just a hole in the ground. Is it the brick lined and now of course they've gotten much better. Even the septic systems have a tank to allow for some treatment and some biological activity to break down some of the waste.
Now, with septic systems, it really comes into play when we talk about accessory dwelling units. Now, while there's so much to be said about accessory dwelling units, and we'll get into a little bit after we talk about septic systems, the biggest thing holding back someone right now from creating an accessory dwelling unit, say for their parents, for their kids, or just to rent out to local workers, is a septic system. It's the waste. It costs too much. You're not going to get the money back in the rent. Is there, I know some people, more from the public, have proposed government incentives, to help pay for septic systems so that people would be willing to create more affordable housing and more accessory dwelling units. Is that something that you talk about, creating legislation that could maybe help get, whether it's tax breaks or loans, whatever it may be, grants to help people create septic systems so that they can build affordable housing at an affordable rate where it actually makes sense?
Well, what do you mean by affordable?
Well, in the long run, the rent is
Affordable.
worth it.
Um,
What you're getting back from the rent is it actually pays for the accessory dwelling unit, and that's the
the
goal.
owner of the housing, you mean?
Hmm.
Okay, so from that standpoint, the the um, the county subsidizes right now, and we subsidize some of it with our money, and a lot of it, the New York State has been very generous. These are for single family septic systems. So a lot of that cost for the alternatives is for is subsidized by the county through the state. the state provides us with a lot of money. As far as accessory units, I don't think that they're included in that. I'm trying to think if they are or not, because I know that's been something that's been brought up a number of times at these wastewater meetings, is that if you have denser populated areas like downtowns, and you need extra septic flow because you want to have an apartment above a store. So um, now you have not only space issues because you have to put in, if you have to increase your, it all has to go through the Suffolk County Health Department. So if you're going to increase your flow, you have to go ahead and make sure that your system can handle it. One of the biggest problems that I've been interested in addressing, and I know there's other interest in it also, is the setbacks. So if you have these tighter areas in a downtown, in a hamlet area, the setbacks are not going to be met because you just have these, everything's right against each other. So how can you allow for that increased flow? If you have a better treatment, I've argued the point you should have decreased setbacks because then you could have, you could put that apartment or two above an existing store or existing business, in a downtown area.
That's a very interesting point, and that's what I have a show here with East Hampton Village Mayor Jerry Larson once a month, and that's something he's very passionate about. Is he wants to update East Hampton Village, and half the problem is the septic system. There's only so many restaurants you can have because the wastewater they need to fundamentally change the entire system in the village. And you see this not only in East Hampton, but you see this all across the country. A lot of downtowns were very aggressively built, and now we're kind of catching up to the point where it needs a lot of change. And it's tough. It all starts with the wastewater is what I've learned over the past few months doing this show. Now, I would like to get your personal opinion of accessory dwelling units, often shortened to ADUs. While I personally believe it's not a long-term solution, it's a short-term stopgap, and it can really help a lot of essential and local workers in the meantime to live in the communities they work in instead of commuting. We've recently had some back and forth with Hochul as far as legislation goes, but all that aside, I just want to hear your opinion on accessory dwelling units.
Sure, and I was on the town board. I supported a law to allow for them under certain circumstances in existing homes, and that had varying degrees of success. What the governor proposed was sort of a brushing aside of land use and zoning, and land use and zoning is a I feel it's a local matter, um, way more local even than the county. And so the either the village or the town really has that authority to say, this is the density we want here. These are the setbacks, the height, requirements. All those restrictions are put in place by the town or the village. And a lot of that has to do, then it goes beyond wastewater treatment. Then you get into parking, you get into traffic, you get into noise, you get into all those other community impacts. Certainly you get into impacts to the school system, the fire departments, can they get in safely? The police departments, how much extra pressure do you put on your public safety? So then you got to get into that whole planning issue of what does increased development do to all the pressure that puts on your infrastructure.
And it's very interesting because, you hear everybody, no matter where you're talking about geographically speaking, we need more housing, whether it's for the lower class, middle class, but specifically government workers is one thing that I'm noticing across the board, no matter what. There's a lot of openings in Long Island for government entities because there's just nowhere to live. I think personally, accessory dwelling units can help that. But obviously, you can only do so much with a few little accessory dwelling units here and there. And then that kind of leads us into the bigger topics of housing, including the Community Housing Fund. Fred Thiel, who I'm sure you know well, and I've had on this show previously, created the CPF, Community Preservation Fund, back in 1999 to have a tax to create funds to preserve land, something that is so critical in Long Island. But now, on top of that, is a proposed community housing fund that each town has to set up as a referendum in the ballot, whether it be this year or next year. I know East Hampton and Southampton are targeting this upcoming election. I wanted to get your opinion on the community housing fund. I know you have done a lot of work in preserving land during your time. I know you have a very extensive background in farming. I believe you're a fourth generation farmer, pumpkin farm, I believe. And so I'm sure this is very important to you. So tell me a little bit about your opinion on the community housing fund. And if you think, the one topic I've seen a lot of back and forth on is, should we do it this year or should we try to get it and wait and plan for 2023? So what's your opinion on the housing fund and if towns should try to push for it sooner than later?
Well, first of all, just a thought on Fred Thiel. He has been an outstanding public servant for a long time, and wow, what a good job he's done. And while he doesn't really officially represent everyone out here, he represents everyone out here. He's really been, yeah, he's been an outstanding public servant, and I got a lot of respect for him and the work he's done for decades. Um, he's there's a lot to be said for his work and his attitude, and so as far as that goes, always if you see Fred, you always thank Fred because he does such a good job. Um, so as far as the towns go, and I've had this conversation with the supervisors because I represent both Riverhead and Southold, and I've had these conversations with both of them, and they're trying to figure out the question is if you set something up, I think the discussions went towards how flexible are they going to be with this money if they collect it? How is it going to affect their, one, like how much of a plan do you have to put it on the ballot to say we're going to try to enhance housing here or there? Um, it comes back to, and I'll keep coming back, I think, to this conversation to the planning issue. Uh, so what does the language have to look like to put it on the ballot? So I would, if those towns put it on the ballot, I would support it because I think it's what Fred did there was a good effort to try to fund some houses. What we did, or housing, I should say, what we did years ago is try to provide some money for, and this is going back when the bubble burst in 2007 and 8. There were a lot of homes for sale. And so instead of building more, the idea was to say, here's money to offset the cost, and it would be a no interest revolving fund that would, and you could do whatever you want, whatever improvement you want it to be. It would be your home, but when you sold it, you'd have to repay the town. Um, that that never so the incentive for you was to take care of it and you want to put it on an addition, you want to put in a tennis court and a pool, you do whatever you want, it's your house. But again, it goes back to, so that never took off because it didn't take long for all the houses to be not for sale, and the town never had enough money to fund anything like that and to set up the mechanism, because when you do these things, then you really have to set up. A lot of government is boring and a lot of hard work. There's a lot of people behind the scenes when someone passes a piece of legislation, whatever it is, who's got to actually do the work to make sure all those things get done properly and legally and efficiently. And so something like this, you mentioned the CPF for land preservation. The 5 towns have land preservation coordinators and staff, and then there's land preservation committees, as well as the town boards and supervisors. So there's a lot of infrastructure there that's developed over the years to make that an efficient program. And the money comes in, so the money has to be collected somewhere. The county plays a role in the collection and disbursement to the towns, but then they have all that infrastructure to make it actually happen, the mechanics. And the same would have to happen here. When that money comes in, someone's going to have to oversee it and then set the rules and guidelines to how they could be spent. So this it's a complicated thing there. It's not. So I would support the towns and what their initiatives would be. And I'll just say I'm here in Riverhead, and I'm looking at the train station here, and they Riverhead incentivized development around the train station to try to take advantage of transportation that's here. And the Suffolk bus, stops in here every day. So they've incentivized and they went out to RFP to find a builder, and they're going to build quite a few apartments right here around the train station. So that's going to be part of and that was a big planning effort. They went through a whole planning effort, and they accomplished that, or they're going to.
Yeah, and I think that's the one thing. I'm 25. Obviously, there are so many more people than me that know more about housing. I just happen to start a show about it. I think the biggest misconception among the public and the government officials when it comes to affordable housing projects is the public doesn't always understand how long they've been trying to get these things going by the time they actually bring it up in the board meetings. I mean, they've been thinking about these projects for the most part for quite some time. There's already been planning, there's already been talks, and it's funny because often these projects get shut down due to public perception immediately, like one town board session in, and then that's that. Which kind of brings us into our next topic, and I would like to ask you to take off your legislator hat and put on your resident of Cutchogue hat.
Sure.
In Cutchogue recently, I mean, as far as last week, I was doing the research this weekend. Georgia Green Ventures, which has built two affordable housing complexes here, one in East Hampton and one in Southampton, was in coordination with citizen Rona Smith of Housing Initiatives, LLC, to create the much-needed, quote-unquote, much-needed development called Cutchogue Woods, proposed for Smith's land located at 15690 Middle Road in Cutchogue. It would be 24 townhouse-style apartments on the parcel of Route 48 in Cutchogue. Basically, though, what my understanding is from the town board meetings over the last week is they're a little worried about a few things. One main thing being the location, as it's not part of the, I believe it's HEQR or something like that, where they try to build everything close, where it's in walkable distance. And basically, I wanted to get your opinion on this project, but also what seems like, based on my research, it could be a quick no. And she already had bought the land, was very excited about it. She used to be in the politics in that area. That's Rona Smith. And I would like your opinion as a resident, not as the legislator.
Sure. So the one thing that we didn't talk about, which I'd like to, if we get back to afterwards, is in perpetuity. Because some of these things are built as affordable housing today. In a number of years, they become housing, and then they're no longer affordable. So I think that's one thing we have to get back to. But as far as this location, so as a resident, I was not part of the stakeholder group, but there was a group that the town board, I was not on the town board then, they formed as stakeholders for the hamlets. And all the hamlets had a stakeholder group, and they marked out tax map parcel by tax map parcel where they'd want to see the hamlet and the halo area. So, Mattituck, Cutchogue, Peconic, so. So, and then when I got onto the town board, then we reconvened those and we actually adopted those. We had the whole stakeholders get together again and make sure that those were actually the parcels. And the idea was to prevent, so as a resident of Cutchogue, and I drive around Cutchogue and I live there, is to prevent sprawl. Because what do people complain about on Long Island? Traffic. Okay. So you want to prevent sprawl. You want to try to minimize that sprawl, because that makes it just like you can turn your town into a city in a hurry. So as a resident, I would like to see the town follow its planning guidelines and say, this is where the town wants to go in the future. Decades have gone into planning exercises to try to prevent the kind of sprawl, prevent the kind of development that leads to, obviously greater density, but it also, in this case, in the woods case, there's also a mature stand of trees that would be really severely impacted. Another issue there. But you've got a location that's kind of like we call it the North Road. That's it doesn't have a lot of ingress and egress to it right now. Um, and it's not in the, it was not put into the halo, for that reason. So, from a land use perspective, from a resident perspective, you'd like to see that development concentrated where traffic moves slower in the hamlets and slower in the halos, and you have an expectation of more traffic, and that's where your services are, your library, your delis, your diner, your barber shop, your post offices, your services are concentrated there. If you had people living there in a walkable community, it would be an advantage.
Yeah, and I just again, I'm not pro or anti Cutchogue Woods or anything. I just wanted to get your opinion on it. I noticed that it's very relevant. It's pretty new
It is. It is.
information, and
It is.
we see the same issues here. I mean, when you talk about affordable housing locations out here, there's only so many spaces for it, and it does have to make sense. It can't be 20 minutes in Northwest Woods where it's affordable housing. How are people going to get around? It does have to be looked at, and that's why this is so. That's why often one issue could stop an entire project, is because if a lot of public get involved on one negative, quote unquote, it could shut down an entire project. I've seen it with my two own eyes. Now we only do have a few minutes left here, but I'd love to get into that. Say that term again.
In perpetuity.
Yes, please explain that for the public and for me, really.
Okay, so what happened in my experience, there was a couple in one in Mattatuck and two in Southold. They were called affordable housing. They were built out into single family homes, but I think they were only affordable for about 5 years, maybe 10, and then they became market rate homes. And so you lose that affordability component immediately, and then you'd have to like keep duplicating that every couple of years. You would build the whole town out one generation. uh, it would be like a city. So the whole idea is, and I'm putting a bill in working with the county to try to make sure anything the county funds will be in perpetuity, whether it's apartments or houses, will be in perpetuity, because there's a certain component, especially in the county, when we fund some infrastructure related to different developments. There's a small component of affordability in those apartments should stay affordable in perpetuity because they are, that's important. You need to have that component, and it could be mixed in with a regular development. It doesn't have to look different. It doesn't, but it should just be affordable.
That's very interesting, and it's also scary to think that that can happen. Because the whole point of affordable housing is you think this should be here a while and it should help next generation. It's not just 5 years worth of affordable housing. With that being said, a lot of, we talk about maybe 20 years ago when you think of affordable housing, and even now when people hear affordable housing, they think low income, they think homeless, they think certain things. It is a middle class issue now, more than ever, especially on Long Island. You hear the term average median income, and you hear the number 60, 70, 80, 90. Often
Right.
what I'm seeing on Long Island is, and this is the last topic we'll talk about, is people just missing the cutoff because it's at 70 AMI instead of 80, or if it's at 60 instead of 70. How can we ensure the middle class gets a fair deal, so to speak, with affordable housing here on Long Island as we move forward?
Well, that's a great question, and that's why at the very beginning of this, I asked you, what do you think is affordable? Because what are you trying to accomplish? Should there be a component? And people always say, well, firefighters and nurses. That's what I hear the most often. People say that need housing, and those are very obviously important components to any community. I mean, you couldn't think of more important components to a community of people providing, healthcare and emergency services. Um, but that goes back to what can a community, what are their expectations? If a community is going to say, I'd like to have affordable housing, we'd like to have it at whatever rate you said there, whether it's 60 or 70 or 80% of whatever federal guideline, whatever the formula is. What, what can the community say? We'd like to have these people live there because they're such a benefit to our community that it's worth us helping pay for that, for their housing. That's what it comes down to, is because you're asking the community to help pay for someone else's housing. So then if you can say, well, there's the benefit, then I think there'd be it's a much easier sell.
No, I agree with you. And I want to thank you. This time goes so fast when I'm having guests on. It really does. I enjoy it so much. I want to thank you for coming on to my show here. Of course, this is Al Krupski, the county legislator for District 1 here in Suffolk County. He's a Cutchogue resident and a fourth generation pumpkin farmer. We have to keep farming going. I'm very passionate about that. My family does the whole community farming thing out here in Amagansett, so I'm very passionate about that. We got to keep the farmlands as well. I'm just adding a little anecdote here, but any last thoughts for the public?
Yes. And first of all, Matt, thank you very much. I think you do a great job. I watched a couple of your other shows, so I know what to expect. I have to be honest. But I think you do a very good job. Um, yeah, the point is to the public is, and I've been elected official since 1985. So the point is, we have to hear from the public so we know what's important because um, if we can't make, I have a lot of life experiences, but I only know what I know. So when it comes to different things, the more input we get, the better job we can do. That's the bottom line. Communicate with your elected officials, whether they're village, town, county, or state. Make sure they know what your thoughts are. We have the Zoom capability now. We find that public engagement is better after the pandemic because people don't have to drive to Riverhead or have to drive to Hauppauge to to talk to a legislative committee. We find it's been a great tool for public engagement. And obviously, emails are much better. I mean, the phone rings here. We don't get many letters anymore. So, the communications change, but it's I think, made us more accessible, and people need to reach out to their elected officials. I think this is why, and that's helpful.
Well, thank you so much. I really do appreciate your kind words. For Legislator Krupski, I'm Matt Lownes. Thank you so much for tuning in to the All in Affordable Housing Show here at LTV. I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, and you too. Appreciate it.